This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt in a Huggies best-fitting diaper. Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby.
Two sisters, one a respected TV producer, Jill Blackstone, and the other, Wendy. She was disabled, nearly blind and deaf, and Jill had devoted herself to taking care of Wendy.
Jill was her best friend, her sister, her everything.
But the sister bond was shattered when Wendy and some of the sisters' rescue dogs were found dead in a garage next to a toppled-over barbecue grill. Jill says accidental carbon monoxide poisoning killed everyone. Police do not believe her.
Police arrested Jill Blackstone for the murder of her sister.
Investigators think it was staged to look like an accident.
Who will you believe, especially now that a secret source has come forward with evidence never made public before?
Jill was a good producer. There's no doubt about that. But would she produce murder is the question.
Season 2 of Bad Bad Thing, The Blackstone Sisters, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
I always say, show me a perfect family. I'll show you a family with secrets.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, you can expect to see some amazing things in America's national parks, but maybe not a fully loaded 18-wheeler. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my runaway co-host, Alice.
I see what you did there, Brett. Runaway with so many meetings, and who does not love a runaway, fully loaded 18-wheeler?
I know.
Me, this girl. Have I told you the story?
No.
Have I?
I can't wait to hear it.
You know what? This is really bad. When you do the podcast long enough, you start being like, Grandma Betty and repeating all your stories, and people are like, we know, we've heard it. Have I told you guys about the time I was hit and run victim of an 18-wheeler?
Maybe. You have told me this story.
I think I have. So I will say that this particular episode hit me deep because I remember how terrifying it is, and I remember the 18-wheeler coming at me, and I was in a Nissan Altima, so a very small sedan, and I remember the 18-wheeler had had a cab and two trailers. So it was two box trucks. And I remember everything in slow motion, it coming at me and thinking this is the end. This is the last thing I'm ever going to see in my life. And then I didn't really see anything because I was spinning and I was flipping. And so everything was blurred. And I remember the whole time being very conscious, this is the end. And there's no possible way to survive this. And that was all I remember from that entire accident. And I clearly survived. So
didn't the EMT who responded to you turned out to listen to the show and emailed us? Do you remember this? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And
oh my goodness. I must have shared this 3 years ago.
Place. Yeah, you did. It was it was this place on this road
it was
at this
on the border.
Time.
Yes.
Yeah, and he was I was there.
I was the one, and I think I responded and was thanks for saving my life.
Yeah. That was crazy. That was that was the first sort of podcast weirdness where somebody's listening who's directly
which also makes
lives.
sense because all to say is I personally know how terrifying runaway 18-wheelers are. And it's no laughing matter, and that's not a joke whatsoever. And the story we're about to tell today, it just feeds all of the fears I already have of 18-wheelers.
And I gotta say, this is our first post-October episode. We totally could have done this one in October because it is so weird. This is one of the weirdest stories that we've talked about. We do weird stories sometimes. David Lewis always sticks out in my mind, guy who was watching the Super Bowl and then ended up the next day in a hit-and-run accident 2,000 miles away, and nobody knows how he got there. This is a similar story to that. It is very strange. It's very unusual, and it comes from Unsolved Mysteries. Alice, did you watch Unsolved Mysteries growing up? Do you remember Unsolved
Mysteries? Now, that
Mysteries?
I did because it was not on during school hours, so I watched that.
Yes, Unsolved Mysteries. Amazing show. Robert Stack. They remade it recently for Netflix. We've covered a couple cases, at least one, that they did. And it's good. Not criticizing the Netflix version, but the original was amazing. And I think so many of us out there, so many of you listening, you got your start with Unsolved Mysteries. And honestly, I was thinking about this today. Maybe somebody's done this. I don't know if they have or not. But if anybody out there is looking to start a podcast and you want an idea, I'm about to give you gold. I'm basically handing you a bar of 24 karat gold. So take it, run with it. And one day, you know, when you're super famous, have us on your show. But if somebody just started with season 1, episode 1 and covered all the cases, covered like Unsolved Mysteries, like Rewind or something, Unsolved Mysteries, Obsessed with Unsolved Mysteries, you'd probably get sued for using that. But if you could come up with a way to do Unsolved Mysteries and just cover all the cases in the episodes and go through it one at a time, I think people would absolutely listen to that. So that is my gift to you. Go do that.
It would be kind of like Date with Dateline, but like, you know, like Unsolved with Unsolved Mysteries or something like that. You know?
And it would have all the nostalgia aspect of it. I mean, I think it would be
you could
incredible.
even dress in period costume, period being like 80s and 90s, you know? It would be amazing.
It would be amazing.
Which really is already coming back. It's like
maybe we should
present
do
day.
this. This could be podcast 3. What do you think?
Okay,
No?
I guess we just signed up for a third one. So does that mean you're having a baby? Because we only add a podcast when we have a baby.
Yeah, not having a baby. I know of. But
that actually would be amazing because I went to go buy jeans the other day and it was just like the 90s again. I was like, these are 90s jeans. Like, did you just recycle them? Like, these are not new jeans, which fantastic. Because I just went home and took out my jeans from the 90s and they are just as good
there
today.
You go. What is old is new again. There's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun.
So Unsolved Mysteries covered this case. And I always remembered this one. This is one I saw back in the day and I always remembered. And then Mr. Ballin, y'all know I love Mr. Ballin, he covered this case a few months ago and I was like, we need to do that one. And then when I was thinking of cases for post Halloween, I thought, let's do it. Let's do this case. And it is, those of you, as soon as I say the name, those of you who remember this, you're going to be right with me. The case of Devin Williams. And this is a case that's going to take us all the way back to the 90s when jeans were, I don't know, high rise? What did jeans do in the 90s? They were great. Everything was great about the 90s. It was like the roaring 20s. You know, everybody, it was before 9/11. It was after the fall of the Soviet Union. We were all living the dream. That was the 90s. And Devin Williams, he's a guy he's doing the best for his family. Very ordinary guy, but he's going to end up in an absolutely extraordinary situation.
So let's get started then, Brett. And I will say, I love the national parks. I don't love 18-wheelers, so I was conflicted about this story, and really I come out from this story just being freaked out about everything in life. So this may be like the source of all my fears in general. But let's dive in for those of you who don't know this stranger than life type of story. So take us back to Memorial Day weekend 1995 in Arizona's Tonto National Forest. And Lynn and Jack Yarrington were enjoying a peaceful Sunday morning on their camping trip. Peaceful, that is, until they heard an unmistakable but impossible sound. The roar of a big rig truck. And sure enough, down the narrow dirt roads of the national forest came a semi-truck, hauling behind it a full trailer, 18 wheels, 10 tons, and 48 feet of pure terror. It roared down the road past where the Yarringtons had set up their tent like something out of a fever dream. But neither Lynn nor Jack could believe it. There was the obvious. 18-wheelers aren't exactly known to cruise the trails of national parks. Not only is there no reason to do so, it's not exactly a thoroughfare for hauling your 18-wheelers. It's not like there's anywhere to go in the park, and it doesn't save you time on the road to go through a national forest. And also, to state the obvious, it's not allowed by law, and basically impossible as a matter of physics due to the size of the truck and the small, narrow, unpaved nature of hiking trails in national parks. The roads running through the park were tiny, barely big enough for two cars to pass each other on, and barely paved when they were paved at all. Yet here the Yarringtons were seeing something that seemed utterly impossible.
And the thing is, you might imagine, I mean, frankly, I don't really know how this happened, but you might imagine somebody took a wrong turn, they ended up on the park road, somehow they missed the park gate and just kept going. But once again, this 18-wheeler is not just rolling down the road. It is flying down the road as if it is on the interstate highway. And off it goes. And just put yourself in these people's situation. There's nothing more unsettling than seeing something that absolutely should not be where it is when you're there. You're out, you're enjoying this beautiful day in the national park, and all of a sudden an 18-wheeler comes flying by at 60 miles an hour. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever been broken down on the side of the road. When one of those things goes by on the side of the road, it makes you shudder. Imagine seeing that from your tent one morning in the middle of a national park. It's definitely the kind of thing that's going to stick with you, and it's going to terrify you. And look, after they saw it, there might have been a moment when the two of them wondered, did we just imagine this? But any such thoughts were shattered when the truck came roaring back up the road. Somehow, in this national park, it had managed to find a place to turn around, and once again, it had come roaring back by the Yarringtons' campsite. And for the rest of the day, reports of this 18-wheeler truck terrorizing the park would start to filter in to the local police department and the ranger station. And you can only imagine what they thought when they heard it. Like, what are you talking about? An 18-wheeler in the park? That's crazy. But that is exactly what they were getting. And one of these reports came from a driver of a vehicle that was almost ran over head on by this truck. The driver, imagine this, driving your little vehicle down the park road. You know, maybe you're heading out. You've had a good time at the park, Memorial Day weekend. You're heading out. You turn a corner, and all of a sudden, there's an 18-wheeler bearing down on you. There's nowhere to go because the road's barely wide enough for the 18-wheeler. So what do? You throw it into reverse. And that's what this person did. They threw the car in reverse. They're going backwards down this park road as fast as they can go while this 18-wheeler is bearing down on them. And at the last minute, they managed to spin their car off of the road onto a side road, and then the 18-wheeler flies by. And they said they could see the driver as they're backing up. Like, they're absolutely terrified, but they could see the driver, and he seemed like he didn't see him at all. He was staring straight ahead, you know, changing gears like in a Garth Brooks song or something. He's changing gears. He's heading down the road. He doesn't even notice this car in front of him. And that is just the first example of some real weirdness that we're going to hear about the driver of this truck. So park rangers, they are stunned. They go out to find this truck. But the thing about the Tonto National Forest is it's 3 million acres. It's actually the 9th largest forest in the United States. So they're looking for the truck, but it's not easy to find. But then a deputy named Dean Wells gets a call from a terrified man saying that he'd found an 18-wheeler stuck in the middle of a meadow. And he had talked to the driver, and the driver was acting very strange.
And that's just the beginning. So the man who had called was Charles Hall, and he and his family had come to the meadow in this beautiful national forest to have a quiet picnic. But when they stepped through the trees, they were shocked at what they saw. A full-sized 18-wheeler sitting in the middle of the meadow, mud up to the top of its wheels, and a man stood next to the cab staring off into the distance. Although Charles's family begged him not to, Charles couldn't help himself. He walked out into that field to talk to the man. Charles approached the man, and after asking him if he was okay a few times, the man finally turned and looked at Charles. He stared at him, but didn't seem to actually see Charles. When Charles asked if he needed help, the man responded, "They made me do it." Charles said, "What?" And then the man said, "No, you can't help me out. I'll never get it out of here. I'm going to jail." Now remember, Charles doesn't know all that's been going on and all the terrorizing that this 18-wheeler has done throughout the park in the day. All he sees is a very strange sight. An 18-wheeler at rest in the middle of a meadow where they're hiking to. So it's not like he understands that many people have almost been run over by this man, that there's been all these deputies out looking for this truck. So he does the thing that I would be probably too scared to do, and he actually talks to this man.
And this takes this story to another level altogether. It was already an interesting story, but the fact that he has this interaction with this person, and those first words are words that are going to hang over this story till the very end. They made me do it. What exactly does that mean? Who is they? What is it? What did he have to do? Obviously, he's in the middle of a meadow. He's stuck. He recognizes he's not able to get out. And there is a moment of sort of clarity here. If you think something very strange is going on, he recognizes this is not a good place to be, and there are going to be consequences. He recognizes that, and he expresses that to Charles. But Charles, at this point, he is completely freaked out. He has had this very strange interaction with this person, and he mentioned jail. And so now all of a sudden, Charles is thinking, oh my God. Like Alice said, he didn't know anything about all this that's going on. All he does is he and his family, they come out of a clearing, they expect him to see a beautiful clearing, maybe take a picture, and there's an 18-wheeler in the middle of it. So he doesn't know anything, but all of a sudden he's hearing the word jail. And so then he's thinking, I'm in trouble. I'm in danger. Something bad is going on here. And he said he couldn't help but look at the truck and wonder just what the man had inside of it. What was it that would cause him to get arrested? Was it drugs? Was he holding somebody hostage? Was this man dangerous? So he sort of starts to slowly back away, and then when he gets a relatively safe distance, he turns and he runs. He gets to his family, they haul their way back to the car, and they head to the police station. Remember, this is mid-1990s, so nobody has cell phones, so everything has to happen pretty much face-to-face, or you have to get to a ranger station and make a phone call. So Deputy Wells, we mentioned him before, he gets this report of this very unusual thing that's going on down here in the meadow in the middle of this park. So he kind of makes his way down the winding roads. He's been given basically a description of where he's going, but it's a big park. It takes him some time to get there. He heads down the winding roads of the forest. He heads to the meadow, and I got to tell you, the first time I heard this story, the thing that I fully expected was Deputy Wells is going to get to the meadow. There's not going to be a truck. It's going to like vanished into thin air, right? But he gets to the meadow, and there is the truck. It's sitting there, stuck in the meadow, stuck in the mud, just as he was told. So then he goes down to the vehicle, but he can't find the man. The man who's described to him is nowhere to be seen. He tries the door to the cab, but it's locked. Now, he can see through the windows, and he can see inside. Everything appears to be in order. There's nothing that indicates any kind of accident, any kind of trouble, at least as far as he can see in the cab. And that means the only thing left to check is the trailer. Now, remember, Deputy Wells, he knows a few things. Number one, this thing isn't supposed to be there. Number two, he knows the man said something like, they made me do it. Number three, he knows that he was concerned about going to prison. And number four, the man has now disappeared. So if I were Deputy Wells, I would be approaching the back doors of that trailer with a little bit of trepidation. I would be wondering, what exactly am I going to find when I throw open the doors of these trailers? So you can only imagine Deputy Wells, he's making his way back there to the trailer. It's sitting there. There are the doors. Maybe he tries the door a little bit. He realizes it's open. And so he knows, I am going to find out. I'm going to find out the mystery. What is in this trailer? You know, is it going to be drugs? Is it going to be some sort of torture chamber of a serial killer? You know, something like that. He grips the doors and he flings them open. And there he saw something he probably could not have imagined. There are no bodies, or no drugs, no chained up captives. Instead, there are 1,200 boxes filled to the brim with lettuce and strawberries. More lettuce and strawberries than one man could ever eat. That is what he discovers in this trailer. You kind of imagine he probably stared at it for a little while. Maybe he got in, looked around. Lettuce and strawberries. It's lettuce and strawberries all the way down, right? So he closes the door of the trailer. The refrigeration unit of the trailer was still running, so the truck was off, but lettuce and strawberries are fine. They're being taken care of. And he calls for the biggest tow truck they could find, probably in all of Arizona, because they're going to need it to get this truck out of the middle of a meadow. They'll probably need another tow truck to tow the tow truck out of the meadow by the time they get done with it.
I mean, I bet you weren't expecting that. Lettuce and strawberries. First of all, like kind of an odd combo. I mean, I don't work in, food shipping, but like those, a vegetable and a fruit, maybe they help each other not get bad. I don't know. You know how like bananas give off a certain pheromone or something?
Chemical. Yeah. Bananas and apples, you put them together, they'll ripen.
Apples, avocados, anything, right? They help the other fruits ripen too quickly. So maybe lettuce has the opposite effect where they keep strawberries nice and fresh. And my thought would have been, oh, well, clearly this is a cover. It's not 1,200 boxes of fruits and vegetables. It's going to be the first layer of strawberries, next level, cocaine.
There's some cocaine somewhere in this story, right?
I mean, maybe he's just like popping strawberries and be like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And he's like, you know what? I've eaten a lot of strawberries. No cocaine so far.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Guys, we are in the holiday season, and for a lot of people, that can be a time of joy, but it also can be a time of incredible stress and even some seasonal blues. And if you're somebody who struggles with that, if you just got too much on you, or if the holidays don't bring you the joy that maybe it brings other people, think about checking out BetterHelp. This time of year can be a lot, and it's natural to feel some sadness or anxiety or even some stress. But adding something new and positive to your life can counteract some of these feelings. Therapy can be a bright spot amid all of the stress and change, something to look forward to make you feel grounded, and to give you the tools to manage everything going on.
Absolutely, Brett, especially with the holiday season coming up. There's just a lot of stress for everyone, and BetterHelp can help. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/prosecutors today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/prosecutors. Guys, being in the grocery stores during the holidays is like being stuck in a maze. And don't get me started on the wine aisle. Between the people crowding the aisle, the giant selection, and my admittedly limited knowledge of wine, I always end up grabbing the same bottle and running to the checkout. But with First Leaf, they take the stress out of finding new wine. First Leaf is the wine club that sends me a personalized shipment of bottles that are based on my unique palate right to my door. All I have to do is go to First Leaf's website, answer a few questions about my likes and dislikes, and their expert team will select a customized assortment of world-class wines based on my preferences. And Brett, I am loving the ones that they are picking out for me. After I've tried each one, I can rate them so that First Leaf can send me more wines based on my feedback. It's also crazy how many new types of wine I've been trying and loving thanks to First Leaf.
I know it's a shock to all of y'all, but I'm not much of a wine guy. Just don't have a lot of knowledge when it comes to wine. And when I did that personalized selection, I decided just to go crazy. You can slide your sort of preference between sort of conservative or go wild. And I went wild, and I got wines from all over the world. Portuguese rosés and Chilean wines and Australian wines and wines from places I didn't even know it existed. And I love them. My wife and I cannot wait for the next shipment to arrive, and really excited to see how rating the wines that we did get is going to affect what we get next. You guys are going to love it too. Find the wine you'll love this holiday season with First Leaf. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/prosecute to sign up, and you'll get your first 6 hand-curated bottles for just $44.95. That is a deal you cannot beat. That's tryfirstleaf, tryfirstleaf.com/prosecute. tryfirstleaf.com/prosecute.
Guys, I think all I'm doing these days with 3 little ones is laundry. And have you ever wondered why laundry detergent comes in these massive plastic jugs? They're heavy, messy, and hard to store. Worst of all, 91% of plastic doesn't get recycled, leaving laundry jugs to sit in landfills for centuries to come. I want to ditch the jug. Fortunately, I found a solution: Earth Breeze. Earth Breeze is my new favorite detergent. There's no plastic jug, and it's so much easier to use. The packaging is a cardboard envelope that saves so much space. I can fit 720 loads of sheets where I used to fit just one 60-load detergent jug. And I didn't realize how itchy old-fashioned detergent made me. But Earth Breeze is dermatologist tested, and I truly feel the difference and use it for even my baby's soft skin.
Alice, you're 100% right. I feel like before we had kids, I did laundry like once every 3 weeks, maybe. And now I feel like we do laundry 3 times a day. And Earth Breeze is one of our favorite things to use. It's made it so much easier, and it is so important to us that our kids, I don't have to worry about them. They have sensitive skin, and Earth Breeze is not going to bother them. And most importantly, you still get the powerful clean you need. Earth Breeze is tough on stains, fights odors, and my clothes come out clean every time. So what are you waiting on? There is no reason not to switch. Right now, our listeners can subscribe to Earth Breeze and save 40%. Go to earthbreeze.com/prosecutors to get started. That's earthbreeze.com/prosecutors for 40% off. earthbreeze.com/prosecutors.
And so this is so bizarre. I mean, beyond bizarre, because clearly this truck hasn't been abandoned that long. It still has the refrigeration unit, hasn't run out of batteries, and goodness, we need to save these strawberries and lettuce. So Deputy Wells, remember, he had to trek all the way out here. 300 million acres is very large. He makes his way back to headquarters, and he does some good police work. He checked the databases for missing truckers because clearly this was a truck that was transporting a lot of fruits and vegetables, and there was a trucker who must have been transporting it, and they have to be registered whenever there's any sort of transport. But surprisingly, nothing came up. Completely stumped, Deputy Wells logged it in and went home for the day because what are you going to do? There was nothing illegal in the back of the truck, and seemingly nothing's been stolen, no one's missing, so he calls it a day. The next day, a Monday, the Yarringtons were making their way out of the park at about 4 p.m. But as they were driving out, they passed a man barefoot, crouched on the side of the road, and he was mumbling to himself. Clearly something was off. So the Yarringtons slowed down, and Jack asked this man if he needed any help. And all the man said, without answering the question, was, "I gotta light the grill." Jack could see that this man had a $20 bill in his hand, and he kept striking it with a rock as if to start a fire on the other flat rock at his feet. But then he turned and threw the rock at their car, and at this point they were like, whoa, okay, you know what? We're not going to stick around. We don't really know what's going on. This man isn't making any sense. He's trying to strike the $20 bill as if it were a flint. And now he's kind of attacking them or trying to hurt their car by throwing the rock at them. So they just leave. At around the same time, Deputy Wells was back at work. He checked to see if there were any reported missing truckers again, since nothing showed up the day before. But this time, he gets a hit. A man named Devin Williams had been reported missing from, get this, Americus, Kansas. That's a pretty long way from Arizona, but Wells knew he had his man when he saw the description of the cargo he was carrying. Over 1,000 crates of lettuce and strawberries. But even though Wells had a name for this missing trucker, the mystery was only beginning. And the more authorities learned about Williams, the deeper this mystery got.
We're about to turn to the timeline here, but I just wonder if as many of you out there listening to this story, this is the kind of story, some people, welcome, by the way, to the 20% of you who have returned. We're so glad to have you back with the podcast. It's so great to have you after October. But I've got to wonder if some of you who avoid that, this is the kind of thing that freaks me out. The kind of thing that sends chills down my spine are him standing next to his truck saying they made me do it, and him kneeling over a rock trying to strike a fire with a $20 bill and another rock. Like, there is something about that is so off and just so that is creepy to me. I mean, that's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night, is thinking about someone in that situation where it seems like the world has just gone off its axis for them. Like, we are no longer functioning in the same world. I have my world and they have theirs, and whatever happened in theirs and whatever happens in mine will never cross. And it seems like something has happened here, something dramatic that has sent this person into a spiral where they are driving an 18-wheeler through the middle of a forest in Arizona, apparently believing they're on an interstate, much like he thinks he's lighting a grill. I mean, I think there's a similarity there. The reason he's driving like he is because he thinks, I'm driving on the interstate. Why wouldn't I drive like this? Why is there a car heading towards me on the interstate? You need to get off this one-way section of the road, right? Like, all of that sort of fits together. And that clearly is what Devin Williams, who it turns out that's who it's going to be. I think that is what you're seeing from him when you hear the story.
And, you know, what's really interesting is I know a lot of people may hear the story and immediately think, oh, well, something's happening, whether it's a stroke or, you know, something happening mentally. But I think it's worth noting that he's not just like putting the truck in drive and going on a straight line, right? Like, if you've ever seen those runaway ramps on the side of the highway, that's what they're for. If your car loses control or you've had some sort of medical emergency, all you have to do is barely shift your steering wheel, you know, to the right and run up this large hill so that friction and gravity basically pull your truck to a stop. Here, he's essentially navigating incredibly tight roads. These are not straight roads. If you've ever been in a national park, part of the beauty is that it's not straight roads. They're winding roads so that all of a sudden you turn a corner and there's a beautiful meadow and a clearing. And the fact that there are cars on here and this truck is turning around and shifting gears is something that requires a lot more skill and suggests some sort of ability to actually function. Because remember, the truck isn't ultimately crashed. That's not how it lands in the meadow. It looks like it got stuck, but did not hit anything that caused it to stop.
So let's learn more about Devin Williams, and we'll do that through the timeline. So go back to May 23rd, 1995. So Devin Williams, he's a trucker, and he is well known by his friends and coworkers as an absolutely devoted family man. He loves his family. He has a young family, and it seems like everything's going right for him. He's sort of building this really nice life in America's Kansas. And so he heads out that day for a trip to deliver a load to California. And the plan is he's going to go to California, he's going to drop off his load, he's going to pick up a new load, he's going to bring it back. Now, Devin, this was not what he wanted to do. He didn't like doing long-haul trucking. He preferred shorter routes because he wanted to be home with his family as much as possible. But they had just purchased a new home. I think they had 3 kids at this time. They had just had a new baby. They needed more space. They'd purchased a new home. And you guys know how it is when you purchase a new home. Even if you think you got enough money when you go into it, there are always so many unexpected expenses, and you need to make a little bit of extra money. And that's exactly what he was trying to do. So he agrees, I'll take this long haul trucking, make some extra money, help the family out. He heads out to California and everything goes fine. Perfectly well, no surprises, everything's great. He plans on picking up his load of produce, which is strawberries and lettuce, and then he's going to bring it back to Kansas City. Now look, there's nothing all that remarkable about Devin Williams. He didn't have a history of problems with drugs or run-ins with the law. He didn't owe loan sharks any money. Just running through sort of the kind of things that might lead you to do something strange. None of that appears to apply to him. He is just a family man who has 3 kids and things are going great in his life. And his wife would actually say later that this was the best time in their marriage. They were great. He spent as much time with his young family as he could, and his coworkers would say he was the most even-keeled guy they knew. He never got mad about anything unless there was something that delayed him getting home to his family. That was the one thing that bothered him, because he did not want to sit around waiting on his truck to get loaded when he knew every minute that passed was 1 minute he wouldn't get to spend with his family. So this is a guy who is sort of the ultimate family man. 29-year-old man, everything in the world ahead of him, looking forward to raising this family. He heads out to California. He arrives right on time, exactly when you expect him to be there. He switches up his loads. He checks in with his boss, Tom Wilson, and everything is perfectly fine. He then begins his trip back to Kansas City.
On May 27th, 1995, Devin arrives in Kingman, Arizona. He intends to stop here and sleep in his cab, which is pretty common for long-haul truckers, before continuing on to Kansas. But he can't sleep. He calls Tom again and lets him know that he's just going to keep driving since he's not sleeping anyway, and that way he gets home faster. The next day, on May 28th, 1995, the campers in Tonto National Forest see the 18-wheeler flying through Tonto. Later that day, the truck was found in the field, but there's no Williams. The next day, on May 29th, as they're leaving, the Yarringtons see Williams on the side of the road. Later that day, the police will realize that Devin Williams is missing. They pull a photograph of him and show it to the witnesses, and it's universal. Everyone who's seen this man says it's Devin Williams.
And he's a very striking guy. Like, if you look at a picture of him, he's got this like handlebar mustache going down. If you saw him, you'd recognize him. So
he's
I think everybody agrees
as well.
He's a big guy.
Right.
He wears a cowboy hat. I mean, he's basically the prototypical trucker. But these people are like, yeah, that was him. No question.
And also, there's not that many people you're seeing in the National Forest. And most people going to the National Forest are there to like picnic or hike. And so they're kind of dressed accordingly. And so seeing some man who doesn't seem to fit the environment also stands out. So they all got a pretty good look at him. And they said, yep, that's the guy in the photograph. That's Devin Williams, who's been reported missing in the truckers database. And furthermore, if you had any doubt as to who this person was, they opened the cab of the truck and it's confirmed. Most of Williams's stuff is there. But there are some things that are missing, including his duffel bag, and even some of his favorite tapes are gone. But his briefcase with all his important documents in it are still in the cab. So interestingly, the things you would think you would take aren't taken, but certainly some things are missing, indicating that Devin has left with some of his things. So when they realize that Devin is the missing person, a massive search is launched. Dogs, an army of volunteers, off-road vehicles, they all scour the area, but nothing is found of Devin. If he was ever in the forest, he left no trace of himself.
And so this is where Unsolved Mysteries ends. If you've only seen Unsolved Mysteries, this is the mystery that's left to you. There's this truck, Devin Williams, we believe it's him. He disappears, we never see him. And maybe you think, well, maybe he ran off to start a new life, because you always got to mention that one, right? And he took his duffel bag and his favorite tapes. Because what more do you need? Start a life on the beach in Mexico. Some good tunes in a duffel bag. And maybe you think that's what he did. He just couldn't handle the stress of three kids or whatever. Well, unfortunately, as much as I wish he was living his best life somewhere, that is not what happened. On May 2nd, 1997, two hikers, and I've decided that it's just an occupational hazard of hikers, hunters, and blueberry pickers, apparently, that you may just find a body. If you're a hiker, a hunter, or a blueberry picker, you know, the chances are eventually you're going to stumble upon something. And sure enough, two hikers are walking about a quarter of a mile, so not even that far from where Devin was last seen, by the Yarringtons on their, trying to start the fire. in an area that had been heavily searched by everybody and their mother. You know, you got the dogs, you got the searchers, everybody searching, which is just, once again, to remind you how hard it is to find a body in a place like this. They're walking down the trail, they turn a corner, and what do you know? Right there in the middle of the trail, what do they see? Something white on the ground, shining in the sunlight. And in fact, it is a human skull. They report this, the skull is collected, and sure enough, it belonged to Devin Williams. Now, no other body parts were found, and based on very limited, I mean, they basically have the upper part of the skull, there's no way to tell exactly what the cause of death was from what little investigators have to go on. And it is unknown to this day what happened to Devin. The family eventually actually sued the trucking company, trying to recover some money. Their theory of the lawsuit was a little unclear. They basically alleged there must have been some sort of foul play that happened here. But in any event, the lawsuit failed. Probably not that much of a surprise. And the real reason for that is there's simply not enough evidence available to really blame anybody for what happened. The family to this day believes that Devin somehow succumbed to foul play, but how and when and where, that is a mystery that seems almost impossible to unravel.
What a confusing but really sad story, because up until really the day before, Devin was last seen, he was just a regular guy who loved his family and was doing, honest work, being a trucker. And he was reliable. And the only thing that seems to be off is that one night, that fateful night, where he said he couldn't sleep and decides to drive on. And that was the beginning of the end. And I don't think this is something we'll ever really know, because there's just not enough of him to be able to tell what happened. And for those of you who are thinking, how did people miss, half of a skull? First of all, why was there half of a skull? And why was the half of the skull in the middle of the trail? Well, we've said this before too, but when you're kind of in the wilderness, the elements get to you, but also creatures get to you. They, will break off pieces of bone. They'll drag them around. We talked about this in the very sad case of Mitrice Richardson, that oftentimes bones will be scattered because many animals are scavengers. They're not the predators who actually go after prey, but they rather find and scavenge for prey that's already, ready for them to eat. And so likely the skull was brought to the middle of the trail. And also think about how many trails are weaving and winding through 300 million acres. Many, many, many. And so it's just possible that it took some time before someone walked this exact part of the trail.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think, we talk about miracles of true crime sometimes, and they happen where it's just, what are the chances? And I think you're right. 2 years after he disappeared, some animal, for some reason, unearthed that skull and left it there in the middle of the trail. And these people, at the right time, because if they weren't there, if it sat there for 2 days, maybe another animal comes along and knocks it off the trail, and then we never find it either. But it just so happened that at the perfect time, they come along and they find it. And so at least we know what happened to Devin. His family, we don't know what happened, but his family knows he's not missing. They don't have to wonder if he's ever going to walk through that door. They don't have to speculate that maybe he left them, that he abandoned them. You can imagine how that would weigh on you. Wife, the kids, the dad just walk out on us. No, something terrible happened to him, so at least we know that. Figuring out what it is, though, is a lot harder, and that's essentially all we know. There's not a whole lot more out there, and there's not a lot more that's been developed since then. But there are a lot of theories in this case, and you can imagine with that, the paucity of facts that we have, there's a reason that we're going to be able to talk about theories here for quite a bit. And there are a lot of them, and people have come up with a lot of ways of figuring out what happened here. And there's a few things that I would just note as we go into theories. What do we know? We know that he was a trucker who wasn't used to long-haul trucking. That's the first thing. This is sort of unusual for him. We know that the day before he shows up in the park, he is having trouble sleeping we know that the day he ends up in the park, he gets stuck and he says, "They made me do it." And we know that he obviously was acting in a way that was very much sort of out of touch with reality. Those are the things we know for sure. And so with those sort of guideposts, what can we say as far as theories go in this case?
And, as we dive into theories, and this first one would fit this, is note how close he is found 2 years later. And remember that as soon as they basically realize Devin Williams is missing, really by the next day they have a name, they get these search parties together, they get these dogs there, and they search just this area, precisely the area where his skull is found. And what this is now a little bit more conjecture, but what that leads me to believe is that likely those who were calling out for him and yelling and making a lot of noise as an army of volunteers are tramping through the forest looking for someone, is that he likely either did not want to be found or could not make any noise to notify people of where he was. And instead of just not being able to notify, it may have been that he was unconscious and unable to hear people looking for him. So one of those two things, whether he was hiding or whether he was completely unable to call out to those he could hear, because they likely were very close to where he was soon after he was reported missing. So let's talk about the first theory, and that's some sort of health episode. Specifically, perhaps a diabetic episode. Some have speculated that Devin was in the midst of some sort of diabetic episode. Now, if you've seen a picture of him, you know that he's a pretty large guy. And we know that hypoglycemia can lead to psychosis that includes symptoms such as visual hallucinations, delusional thinking, and confusion. Although this could explain some of what happened, because it certainly seems that those who interacted with Devin that day or so, he wasn't all there. He was maybe seeing things. He was maybe paranoid. He wasn't really in touch with reality or answering their questions. And he certainly seemed confused. Not violent, but confused. That all might fit, except there's a problem. If Devin was diabetic, we've not found any evidence to confirm it. And you would think that was something that'd be out there. You typically don't develop diabetes at age 29. It is possible. It is certainly possible. But there's nothing that we've been able to find in his medical record to suggest that he was diabetic, was struggling with hypoglycemia, or had any issues with his glucose levels. All we know is that there is this diagnosis that could lead to some of the symptoms that he seemed to exhibit. But other than that, we have no idea whether there's any evidence of him having a diabetic episode.
And as we walk through these theories, I think each one is going to have something in common. It's a theory that could work based on what we see, but we're missing a piece of evidence that could support it. And maybe you're somebody who's followed this much more deeply than we have. Maybe you have access to original records. Maybe you live in Arizona. You've really dove into this. If you have some key to this mystery, please let us know. We would love to know information that we don't have. So if you have any information as we go through these that help support one of these theories, we'd love to hear it. The second possibility is carbon monoxide poisoning. Another theory is that Devin Williams was poisoned by carbon monoxide. Maybe there was a leak into the cab, and Devin, who spent hours inside most of his time, including when he was sleeping, was affected. Now, we know that carbon monoxide can lead to confusion, decreased cognitive ability, and other mental abnormalities, and might possibly result in the kind of behavior we see from Devin Williams during this period. But there's a problem. Carbon monoxide poisoning also tends to lead to loss of consciousness and fatigue. And we know that Devin was, in fact, having trouble sleeping the day before he disappeared. And that makes you think if there were a carbon monoxide issue, it would have manifested itself in a different way than what we're seeing. And I think that makes it hard to believe that carbon monoxide would be responsible. And the other thing about carbon monoxide poisoning, at least to my understanding, is once you remove yourself from the carbon monoxide, if you're not already sort of fatally impaired, it begins to sort of take care of itself. And remember, there's a period where Devin's just standing outside in the middle of a meadow, admiring the view until people show up. And later on, he's in the forest. You would think at some point he would start to come out of this, but obviously he doesn't. So I think we can probably strike this one as a possibility.
So then let's go to the face of the words that we know Devin to have uttered. And that would suggest some sort of foul play. Could Devin's strange trip have been the result of foul play? I mean, it's possible, though there again is no evidence of it. Nothing was obviously missing of value from the truck. In fact, probably the most valuable things, like his documents, are still there. And all of the lettuce and strawberries are still there. The truck itself is very valuable, whether it be the rims or things within the cab. But nothing is missing from the truck or looks like it's been ransacked by burglars. And there's no evidence that Devin was taken to the park and somehow got stuck in the park against his will. The only evidence someone else was involved at all in this strange episode was Devin's own words when he said, "They made me do it." Again, who's they and why? And that leads us to another theory, Brett. One that I think has been around for a very long time that we've not talked a lot about, and I think we really need to take a deep dive into this one.
I think you're right, Alice. Who you ask? Who is they? Aliens. And one theory is that aliens are involved in this case. So take Devin's unusual behavior. It could be that it was the result of an alien abduction gone wrong. Now, whether aliens exist, and if they do, whether they abduct people, that's, of course, a matter of ongoing controversy. However, in the alien abduction community, there are a few commonalities that you'll often see from people who survive alien abductions. Those things include confusion, loss of time, finding oneself in unexpected places. Now, other than the weirdness of the whole thing, there's nothing in particular to prove this. It's not as if we have any sightings or anything like that. But go with it for a second. You have Devin, who is driving down a deserted interstate in the middle of the night. Imagine he's abducted by aliens who do something to his mind, do something to his brain. At the same time, they drop him back off, but instead of dropping him off at the interstate with his truck, they drop him off south of that in this area of a national park. Devin, who's basically on autopilot at this point, goes through the motions. He never recovers from the trauma of what he has suffered. And that's why you see him doing these things that make no sense in a place that makes no sense. This actually kind of fits. If you follow the alien community, I don't consider myself a part of that community, and I don't want to disparage them in any way, and I'm sure I'll get criticism from them if I get this wrong. But this sort of idea of people being put back in places that aren't quite right fits with a lot of the theories, and national parks play a big role in this. Those of you who are familiar with Missing 411, one of the theories about why you have so many unusual things happen in national parks is because they also tend to be hotbeds of UFO activity. So, I don't know. I realize this is out there, but it is such an unusual case that it makes you wonder, is this a possibility?
I mean, Brett, I think what we've always said is everything's a possibility. Although there might be as much evidence of aliens here as all the other theories that we have expounded upon. So is it likely? I don't know, except that the whole point of this story and why it's so eerie is that there's no evidence of anything, really, except that we have an 18-wheeler in the middle of a meadow where it should not be, and we still have no answers to this day. So we'll put aliens in the corner. We're not dismissing it whatsoever, but let's keep going because there are a couple more theories that I think might get closer to what happened here. Another theory that jumps to mind is a different kind of health episode, and that's a mental illness episode. Devin's family says that he had no history of mental illness, though, and this would have been one heck of a first occurrence. Maybe he hit his head, and this was the result of some sort of concussion. That's possible, of course, but again, there's no evidence of any damage on his truck, and so he wasn't in a wreck. And remember, the inside of his cab is also undisturbed, so it doesn't appear that he hit his head hard enough to cause any damage that was visible to the eye that would have been kind of needed to cause the type of then reaction he had after the fact. Maybe he could have been struck. So he didn't get in an accident, but maybe he was struck by a mystery assailant. And this goes more to the foul play. But where was he hit? It would have had to have been sometime before all of this happened. Sometime where, was he hit in the truck and then put his car into drive and kept driving? Was he outside of the truck, got hit, and somehow stumbled back into his cab and was able to drive after he'd been struck? But why would this person strike him? And again, there's no evidence to show that he had been struck. But the interesting thing about this theory is it can't really be disproven either because we only have half a skull. So we can't take his skull and see if there had been trauma to some part of it. The part we have doesn't look like there's trauma, but certainly there's a lot more to the skull that could have been analyzed to see if there had been some sort of strike to the head that would have caused him to have some sort of an episode, whether temporally from the strike or if he was going through some sort of mental illness that had never manifested itself until he was 29 years old.
Yeah, I mean, the sudden onset of mental illness is, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's hard to explain. The being struck in sort of the same way as Jason Landry, who we talked about before, we all know that blows to the head can cause you to act in ways that appear inexplicable to the outside world. I'm not sure exactly what part of his skull we have, but from reading it, it seems like it's the top part. Given that it had been 2 years, I don't know that you necessarily could determine some sort of minor brain injury. Remember, concussions are really an injury to the brain itself. So you can have a concussion and there's no indication on the skull, for instance, that you had one. I don't know that we really have enough to be able to rule this out. It fits with, and I think this is what his family was going for. It fits with what we see, some sort of really traumatic injury to the brain, leading to a lot of confusion, bizarre behavior, autopilot type behaviors. It fits in a lot of ways. But like so many things, it's hard. We just need that one more piece. If we had just one more piece of this, I feel like we probably could get there. But because we don't have it, it's so hard to say this is a mental health issue.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Huggy knows that babies come in all shapes and sizes, and their tushies do too. Huggies' best fitting diaper is their Little Movers with its curved and stretchy fit. Moms know that there's nothing worse than an ill-fitting diaper, especially for your active babies. I love Huggies because I can rely on them to keep my baby covered while she moves around. You guys have been with me as baby Brittany's been born, and now she is starting to crawl, and I just love these Huggies because they keep everything contained, but they also allow her to be the active baby she is.
Guys, we are covered up with babies on this podcast, and we're so glad to have Huggies. I don't know what we would do without them. Huggies Little Movers are curved, so my babies feel comfy no matter how much they're moving around, and they are moving around a lot. They also offer up to 12-hour protection against leaks, which is a game changer. Get your baby's butt into Huggies' best fitting diaper. Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. Guys, we are so excited to welcome Noom to the Prosecutors family. You know the problem with fads. They come and go. So when it comes to weight management plans, you need a long-term solution, and that's Noom. Noom uses science and personalization so you can manage your weight for the long term. Noom's psychology-based approach helps you build better habits and behaviors that are easier to maintain. The best part, you decide how Noom fits into your life, not the other way around. Based on a sample of 4,272 Noomers, 98% say Noom helps change their habits and behaviors for good.
Brett, these diets, fads just don't work for me, which is why I'm so glad that Noom helps you understand the science behind your eating choices and why you have those cravings. Noom's personalized courses are easy to follow and will help grow your confidence with tools you can put into practice on the very first day. And they'll give you the knowledge and wisdom you need to make informed choices about what you eat. Noom's really changing how the world thinks about weight loss. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's NOOM.com to sign up for your trial today.
And that leads us to our final possibility on the theories, and then we'll get into what we think happened. And that's drugs of some sort. Maybe Devin took some bad drugs. Some truck drivers are known to take drugs to stay awake for long hauls, but Devin was subjected to regular drug tests, and he had up to this point always passed them. His family is adamant that he did not take drugs even when he was on these trips, and they believe it is highly unlikely that drugs have anything to do with this case. Okay, so we've gone through the theories. I have my own theory of what happened here, Alice. So here's the thing. I feel like in this case, we're very much in a Sherlock Holmes. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, is likely the truth. And I feel like in so many of these cases where you have this massive mystery, there is one thing that you assume is a premise that's incorrect. And in this case, I think the premise that we assume that's incorrect is the drug premise. I think because he had passed drug tests and because his family says he didn't do drugs, we assume it couldn't be drugs, and so we eliminate that as a possibility. But I think if you look at the circumstances here, there are things that point to it. Number one, he was not used to this. This was not what he normally did. He didn't do long-haul trucking. He tended to do routes closer to home. This is a long-haul trucking route. You have produce, which you have to. This is not delivering televisions where it's good if you can get it there on the day of. You have to get it there on time or else you may not get paid at all, and it could be a big deal. He had to get this stuff back from California to Kansas City, and he had to do it on time. We know from him talking to his dispatcher that he was having trouble sleeping. What causes you to have trouble sleeping? Amphetamines of some sort. The kind of things that truckers were known to take in the 80s and 90s. I'm not going to say they still do it today because I don't want to accuse anybody of anything. But nevertheless, fairly common that people would take those kind of drugs to stay awake so they could continue on the road. That's the whole point of trucking, is to get from point A to point B in as short a period of time as possible. And every minute you're not on the road is time and money lost. So here's what I think happened. I don't think he normally took drugs, and I'm sure he passed these things. I think he probably was talking to some trucker buddy at some truck stop, explained the situation. They were like, look, man, take some of this. It'll get you through. He didn't really know what he was taking. He didn't really know how it would affect him. It was the first time he'd ever really taken it. Maybe it was some bad stuff. He thought it was meth and it was actually PCP. I mean, who knows, right? He takes it. The initial thing is he can't sleep, so he's going to get on the road. Or him saying he can't sleep is a lie. That's the other thing. He calls him and says, hey, I can't sleep, so I'm going to get on the road. But in reality, he has taken something that will keep him from sleeping, that will allow him to be on the road. He gets on the road. He starts down it. The drug starts to affect him in ways that he can't anticipate. And it leads to what we see happening the next day, which is him in the national park and all the bizarreness around it. The whole "they made me do it" thing, he could be talking about whoever gave him the drugs. He could be talking about his bosses who wanted him to get the produce there as quickly as possible. He could be talking about his family who made him go out on this long-haul trucking route that he didn't normally do. But I think it's that. I think he did something he didn't normally do. He had a reaction he wouldn't normally have. He didn't know how to handle it or couldn't handle it because it had such an effect on him. And everything that happened after that follows from that.
But I think that's an incredibly, good theory based on what we have, and it seems incredibly likely. And I agree with you on a lot of it. I think there was another interaction that I'll explain. And the reason I think you're hitting the nail on the head here is that he clearly was a very responsible guy, right? Everyone who knew him said he was a loving family man. He had 3 kids. He was taking on this long haul because he was trying to take care of his family, because they'd bought this home, because he's the provider of his young family. I mean, he's only 29, but he already has 3 kids. And they're small, they're still at home, so he likes to spend time with them. But know even just on this one trip how responsible he is. He makes it to California right on time. He does all the things you're supposed to do. He checks in, he talks to Tom, his supervisor, he tells him exactly what's going on. He logs all the things in his trucks. That's why he shows up in the missing trucker database, is because he checks all the boxes. On time is exactly who you want driving your produce across the country. Something had to have happened within a span of really 12, maybe 24 hours. I think it's something less than 24 hours, where he goes from this man that everyone knew him to be, everyone who'd known him for 29 years to be, responsible, on time, maybe would never do drugs, didn't have history of, diabetes or health issues, didn't have history of mental illness. So you go from this guy who has seemingly no issues that could account for what we ultimately see in the park, to about 12 to 24 hours, a completely different person who is clearly suffering from something that leads to his demise. So I don't think he was met with any foul play. I think something happened, and I'll talk more about that something, that caused him to wander off, and the elements ultimately took him over because he was not in his right mind to be able to seek help. And I think that he succumbed to the elements pretty quickly. Even though it wasn't necessarily cold at this time of year, he wasn't in his right mind to be able to drink water. Arizona's very dry. To eat food. He had a lot of food. He left all of it. He didn't take any food with him, so he wasn't thinking about survival in those senses. And he did pass people who could have led him to safety, and he also dismissed those because he didn't know what was going on. So back to your drug theory, I think it's very, very possible, especially in the kind of long haul trucking industry, to take something innocuous. So not necessarily illegal substances, but something like caffeine pills. And I'm thinking of Saved by the Bell, right? A lot of us grew up on Saved by the Bells. We've been talking about the 80s and 90s a lot today. And there's the famous episode where Jessie Spano wants to stay up and study more for her tests, and she takes caffeine pills. Caffeine pills, legal, not methamphetamine, not illegal substances. They're fine, except what does she do? Her anxiety and her insecurities and a lot of things that she's dealing with that are deep-seated, and usually she's able to control them because she has the mental fortitude to do so when she's not sleep-deprived and she's not on substances, is to kind of control that anxiety. But now you have caffeine pills, which she was not used to taking, interacted with the deep-seated insecurity she had to begin with, which she now could no longer have the mental fortitude to control because she was sleep-deprived and on a substance that her body wasn't used to, causing her to want to deal with it by taking more of the pills. And causing, if you remember in that episode, I mean, it's just a sitcom, but she turns into someone who is not herself. And I think we have something here. We have someone who is very responsible, who knows that the produce, the trucking, his family, they all depend on him. He seems to me to be such a straight and narrow guy that anything outside of the ordinary could cause him to have a lot of worries because he was the person who never did anything wrong. And so anything slightly off the straight and narrow path could actually bring out some of his anxieties or some of his, worries in life. And I think there was the interaction of something he took. I don't think it was necessarily illegal at all, but I think that he perhaps had maybe a propensity for some sort of mental weakness, shall we call it? Doesn't even have to be mental illness, but some sort of mental weakness that is magnified by doing something out of the ordinary, which is driving far from anything that he knows, far from his kids, taking a substance he may have convinced himself was worse than he was actually taking. So it could have been something as simple as caffeine pills, but then he was like, no, maybe it was laced. Maybe it was something way worse. Maybe it's going to kill me. Maybe my heart is pounding a lot now. And all of these anxieties are getting on top of each other. And I say all this, that's the mental side kicked in at some point, that this is some mix between the drugs and some sort of mental, I don't want to call it a psychotic break because I've been told that's not the right term, but that anyone is kind of able to be mentally weak and at a particular moment, it may not even be a long-standing disease, succumb to it, that at some point these drugs would have worn off, whatever he took. Even if it were an illegal substance like cocaine or meth, they would have worn off at some time. But what we have is that at least about 36 hours after he starts acting weird, he is spotted still acting weird. And I think the drugs would have been out of his system, especially if it's an upper. They can leave your system pretty quickly. And he's a large man, so his metabolism probably can work through whatever drugs he took. But at that point, I think it may have triggered something within his mind. And those of you who know much more about mental illness know that sometimes when something kind of trips the mental break that someone is having, it's not as simple as getting off the medicine, right? That's why we've always said if you are on some sort of medication for a mental illness and you go off of it, you can't just simply go right back on the right dose or the dose you had on previously and your body will recycle, because your body actually doesn't do that. The mental chemicals are very delicate and it's not as easy as an on and off switch. And I think something he took may have switched something in his brain, and it wasn't so simple as just making the drugs go out of his system or waiting for it to pass, because at that point something had been triggered that had never been triggered before, because he'd never taken any substances before. And when he made the call that he couldn't sleep, it was because I think he'd already taken something and he was anxious. He was like, well, I can't just sit here. Like, if I just sit here, something bad's going to happen. I need to do something. He's a doer. He's someone who's been providing for his family. And so driving was his doing. Doing might fix it. And that's why when he was driving in the National Forest, however he got there, he was staring straight ahead because he was determined to find his way out of whatever was happening to his mind. But ultimately, he was not able to do so. And I think this is just a very sad situation that could have had a different outcome. But I'm not exactly sure how, because I think someone would have had to take him into medical custody, but not enough was known at the time to be able to do that for him. And so I don't think there was any foul play. I think he was just trying to do his job, and he probably took something innocuous, or he thought innocuous. I don't think he necessarily even took something that was illicit, and it had a bad reaction in his brain, and it caused him to have an immense paranoia and probably hallucination and stumble off to get away from whatever sort of repercussions would come from losing, 1,200 boxes of vegetables and fruits. And he got scared and fell asleep or hit his head and succumbed to the elements, and luckily was found so that his family had answers.
I think that's a really interesting idea, Alice, and I think it highlights something that we really don't talk about enough, and not just us, but in society. The mask of sanity is delicate and slips easily, and you will sometimes see examples of people, and it happens all the time. You'll see people who do something utterly inexplicable, and you can't imagine why they would do that or how they got themselves in that position. A lot of times it's something we end up kind of laughing at. I'm thinking right now of the lady who got on the plane and all of a sudden decided that the person who was sitting next to her wasn't real, and she had that whole rant about how that person's not real and all of that, right? And we all laughed at it, and there are a lot of great memes from it. But then afterwards, she wrote something about what was going on with her at the time. And you see that not infrequently, where people just kind of lose it. They just kind of lose it for some brief period of time. It can be brought on by all sorts of different things. It happens to people who've never had any kind of events before. And if they're in the right place, then worst case, they become a funny meme on Twitter. But for Devin, if that's what happened to him, I think you're right. He ended up in a place he couldn't get out of, and there was nobody to help him. And there was no one to grab hold of him for however long that was going to last until it passed. And then when it did pass, he would have been like, I have no idea what happened. I don't even remember the last 48 hours. You see this sometimes. There have been cases where people have done really horrible things. I'm thinking some of these people attack people and they have like these quasi cannibalistic episodes, and everybody's like, they must have been on bath salts, or they must have been on this drug or that drug, and they end up getting killed by the police, and then they drug test them and they don't have any drugs in their system. And you think, how is that possible, right? There must have been something that caused this. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And it happens enough that we notice it. Like I said, that these stories become stories for a reason, where we see people acting in these really bizarre ways. And it's like consciousness just shuts off for a second, or the sort of weird autopilot of our brain takes over, and we're no longer making decisions. We're just sort of almost like a robot being driven by some sort of programming we don't understand. I do think you're right, and it fits with what I was saying. I do think he took something, and I think that's what triggered this. I believe his family when they say he's never had any history of mental illness, but I think you're right. It could have been a combination of all sorts of things. The stress of buying a new house, the stress of having a new child, the stress of this long-haul trucking thing, the stress of the deadline, all of that combining together, the stress of not sleeping that much, even if he wasn't taking anything. Just the fact that he wasn't sleeping. Bring all that together, maybe you throw in some sort of drug, even if it's a low-grade one, and you can just, it's so easy to go from in perfect control of your faculties. It's scary. I mean, that is scary, and that's what you see in this case.
Yeah, I think that's so right here. And I think what is really unnerving about Devin's story here is that he was not going to be, he didn't seem to have any of the risk factors to become the story on a true crime podcast, right? To be the subject of an unsolved mysteries. And what you said is so on point here, which is that all of us could be Devin, right? Even if we seem like we are not subject to having these sort of, stresses in our lives, that we lose control, that we have hallucinations. We don't know. We could all be one step away from something like what he suffered, because he certainly didn't seem like he was on a path to that. There's nothing from the timeline that you could point to that says, aha, this man was certainly on a path to doom. There was nothing like that. Really, he was like any of us, you would think, with a beautiful family and a good job and everything going for him. And youth, right? When we're talking about health as well. I mean, sure, he was a larger man, but you can get away with a lot when you're in your 20s, whether it's obesity or drug use or alcohol use. And he wasn't even kind of dealing with any of those things. He was still in the prime of life. But if this can happen to Devin, I think it really puts into focus what could happen to any of us and how delicate our body chemistries are and how delicate kind of our lives are.
So this is a great case. It's a mystery, but I hope you guys will remember Devin. Remember what happened to him and his family. It's obviously a tragedy for them. And as we said, at least they know what happened to him, but they don't know why. And I think the why is the thing that probably continues to haunt them. I don't expect that anyone listening will have any answers, but if you do, we'd love to hear from you. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. And let us know if you have any thoughts or insights. Well, Alice, do you want to answer a question before we sign off?
Sure.
Okay, this is from Stephanie in Texas. I'm picking this one because she's from Texas, and we know how you feel about Texas.
Love it.
Stephanie in Texas says, with spouses, kids, and a full-time career plus 2 podcasts, all requiring hours of research and preparation, what does a typical day look like for both of you, and how do you manage to get any sleep?
We don't. But also, I think we need to suspend reality, because all these questions listing out all we do makes me tired. I think it's because I don't recognize that we do all of it, and that's the only way you can keep putting one foot in front of the other.
I'll say this. The last 2 weeks have been tough. There's been a lot going on the last couple of weeks, and there's just not a... I mean, like today, ask about a typical day. I mean, today I got up, I took a shower, got the kids ready to go to school. My wife took them to school. I went to work. Worked on that thing I was telling you about all day, came home, got my computer, started working on a presentation that you and I have to do in a few weeks, which, we're going to work out, getting that together. Then it was time to cook dinner, fed the kids, put the kids to bed, do this podcast. And then after this is over, going to bed.
I'm not going to bed after this. I'm working.
Yeah,
so,
I'm done for the day.
So let's see what my day today looked like. Today, my husband is out of town for several days. So that meant this morning, all 3 kids were crying at the same time before 6 a.m. And I just kind of had to triage. Everyone was crying for different reasons, but I could hear all 3 kids crying. And so I basically just like dealt with one kid, got one stop crying, 2 were crying. So everyone was crying until everyone got out the door. And barely anyone was fed. But it's okay. People were dressed. It was fine. Got them to school-ish. And then did 2 depositions. That was a lot because you have to like be on the whole time for depositions and you like can't take, there's not a lot of bathroom breaks, that sort of thing. So I've definitely not hit my step count today because I've been sitting all day. And then after the like mental stresses and emotional stresses of depositions, because no one likes being deposed, then I had like all the other work. I looked at my emails because I didn't look at them during the depositions, and I had like 300 emails that all needed like responses before the end of the day. So for the next like hour, I was like furiously writing emails and sending off like projects left and right. Still have about 3 left to do. And then because I'm home with the kids, I made dinner, fed the kids, threw 2 in the bathtub while I put the baby to sleep, and hope everyone's asleep right now. It's really unclear if they are because I forgot to bring the monitor because I was running late. Came to record this, and then I will leave this, and I've been texting with some work people because we have another project that needs to be out the door within the next hour. So then I'm going to go work and maybe sleep tonight. We'll see if everyone sleeps tonight. Who knows?
Don't forget, tomorrow morning.
Oh, and tomorrow we're recording.
Again tomorrow morning, yeah.
But before that, I need to wake up with all the kids, get them out the door. It's my son's birthday. So I made these cute little, can I just brag for a second? Because
of course, brag away.
I made little crafts. And so like I didn't, he doesn't eat cupcakes and cookies and stuff, so I can't bring that for school. So I made these little like animal, he loves animals right now. So it's like animal crackers, which by the way, there's like a shortage of animal crackers, not kidding, because of quality control across the United States right now. So I ordered them from a restaurant depot. Like it probably came in I had to buy 10 pounds of animal crackers, and I stuffed them and put bubbles and little like animal gift bags for goodie bags for his classmates tomorrow. So I did that, and I have to go decorate the downstairs. So when he wakes up, because he's really sad his dad's not here. And so I have to like decorate and make it all happy for him when he wakes up tomorrow.
No.
So I forgot. I have to do that. I'm glad I said that because otherwise I would have forgotten. So it's going to be it's like a fun 24 hours. It's totally fine.
There you go. And we have to record ads after this. So we're gonna do that
we have to record ads. And that's why I love talking about Days of Our Lives.
Days of Our Lives is awesome. Okay, well, I think that's the only question we're going to answer for tonight for obvious reasons. But
wait, can I end it on a positive note?
Absolutely. Well, that wasn't positive. End on a positive note.
What a blessing. All of these things are blessings. Like not a single one of those things is a negative. It's just like literally our cups runneth over because any one of those things would be a great blessing. It just happens we have like way too many blessings. And but truly every single one of those things are like amazing, right? A bunch of people would love to be able to celebrate their kids' birthdays or, be able to do a podcast with their best friend or be able to have a job that they enjoy. And so we are lucky that we get to do that. It's just a lot of blessings.
Yes, it's a lot of blessings. So many blessings. But no, we have very full lives and we are not complaining at all. It's just a lot.
But you know what? I think it's especially for other working parents out there. Hopefully what you heard was not complaining. Hopefully what you heard was reality. So you're not looking at us and being like, how could they do so much? It must come at no cost. It comes at incredible cost. And I think it's helpful to know it so that you're not like, oh, like I do so little in comparison. The answer is like, no. If you maybe prioritize getting more than 3 hours of sleep a night, that's probably better for your life.
Right. Yes. Sleep is not one of the blessings that we are blessed with. Our cup does not runneth over with sleep. So.
Exactly. Yes. But that's a great question. Thanks for asking that, because I think having people see what it looks like and knowing it's not easy is good, because people need to know that like hard work is needed to kind of achieve the things you want in life. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It is okay. And look, I mean, like you said, it's a blessing. I love doing this with you. So We could just stop doing the podcast and I could sleep more, but I choose not to do that because this is so much more important to me. So
Agreed.
There you go.
Agreed.
Okay, guys. Well, this has been great. Welcome back, all of you who come back after the end of October. Hope everybody had a great Halloween. For us, we're recording at the beginning of October, so it's really the perfect situation. But we'll be back next week. We're going to have a new case for you guys, new questions, and maybe new answers. We'll see. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Record television.
But here's what I don't get.
My parents would watch it, and so they would watch it in the evening because they couldn't watch it during the day.
I was gonna say,
I'd watch it with them.
how would you, as a child, know it was even on if it's on during school hours?
Well, I grew up watching Days of Our Lives, the Bradys and the Hortons.
I got
Patch, and I can't remember who Patch was with. Kayla, Kay, yeah. Jack and Jennifer, Bo and Hope, of course. Duh.
But they are delicious.
Yeah.
Did
it's
I
kind of like
did
how
I
cheetahs are all basically genetically identical.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Like
and the
they're just
argument
cloned.
is
They're just
basically
cloned over
all
and over.
clones. All cheetahs can donate organs to all other cheetahs.
No. I mean,
Dive into true crime on Pluto TV. Unravel the mysteries with Forensic Files and 48 Hours. Investigate crimes with Dateline 24/7 and Unsolved Mysteries. With thousands of free crime movies and TV shows, Pluto TV is the true home of crime. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming